here today to mourn the passing of our dear old friend, the headrail trim. He was very old and very brittle, and we didn't realise how brittle until we went to take him off the car. Now, he had a few cracks in him already, but as we went to take him off the car, he literally fell to pieces. And then a very sad event occurred, because the big piece then fell to the bottom of the car and smashed into even more pieces. So now we have lots of pieces. But we can rebuild him. We have the technology, because we have a soldering iron. So we're going to repair it using a combination of fibreglass and plastic welding. Now, even before we broke it, it was pretty marginal whether this could be adequately repaired or not. Where the previous owner has been grabbing hold of it to close the hood, they've put the hand through it a few times, so most of this part was missing anyway. And that's got to be repaired by fiberglassing the back and then filling the front and then spraying it to match. We also made the job worse for ourselves because now we've got a load of plastic welding to do as well, although we had some plastic welding to do anyway because it was quite badly cracked around the mounting holes anyway. So what we're going to do, we'll do the plastic welding first. I'll show you how to do that. Then we'll do the fiberglassing, then we'll do the filling, and then we'll do the spraying. Okay, now plastics come in two flavours. There are what's called thermosets, which, as the name suggests, set permanently, and there are thermoplastics. And thermoplastics, within reason, can be heated up and then remoulded, and you can do that indefinitely. Now, this is a thermoplastic. A lot of the hard plastic trims in the car are the same thermoplastic. It's known as ABS. It's the same sort of thing that a lot of car bumpers and motorcycle fairings are made of. And it's a thermoplastic, so we can weld it back together. Now, in an ideal world, you'd use a plastic welding kit. If you don't have one of those, you would take it to a body shop that specialises in plastic welding, or to a friend who does do that sort of thing. But I have no friends and I'm too tight to pay, so I am going to do the poor boy version of plastic welding, which involves using a simple soldering iron. So this is just a regular 25-watt soldering iron with a flat tip in the end, which will do this perfectly well. It'll look a bit of a mess, but it will do the job. We're also going to want some plastic welding rods. Now, these are ABS plastic welding rods. You need the same type of plastic in the welding rod that you're welding. The different plastics won't stick together, so it's important if you've got an ABS trim, you use an ABS welding rod. You can get those in your local hardware shop, or if not, try online. eBay sell them quite widely. And a couple of other little things we're going to need. We'll find a bit of methylated spirits, useful just for cleaning the piece down, just getting greasing the dirt off it before we try welding it. And also, if you've got one available to you, a Dremel will be useful just for grinding the flashback after we welded it, and for cutting grooves in to help us get the welding rod in there. Not essential, but that's very useful if you have one available. Now, I've got an awful lot of plastic welding to do on this piece of trim, but it would be fairly boring for you to watch me welding this for several hours. So what we're going to do, just for the sake of the video, is I'm just going to weld this one little piece, and we're going to do the whole job on this one little bit, and then you can join me at the end and see how the rest of it turned out. So first thing, let's get a bit of methylated spirit, or any type of solvent that won't attack the plastic will do, so isopropyl alcohol, white spirit, anything would do. And just give it a good clean all over, so that we've got all the grease off it. It's not essential that, but it does help. The soldering iron is up to temperature. Now get this piece in there as best you can, and we're just going to tack it in place. Plastic welding, actually, if you do metal welding, it's quite similar really. We're going to tack it in place first of all, and then when we're happy that it's held in loosely, then we'll weld it in properly. So, soldering iron's up to temperature. I've got it. The piece I'm going to weld in is held in with my fingers. If you want to get it really flush, the surface nice and flush, you could stick it on with a bit of duct tape is a good way of doing it if it's larger pieces. But I'm just going to hold that with my fingers there. And then we're just going to put about 2 or 3 little tack welds on. So when we get the soldering iron up, you can see I'm melting there. And I'll just melt the two sides together in a couple of places. And when you're happy you've got it tacked in place, we're going to have to weld it from both sides. We're going to weld this side and the facing side, but we'll do the back side first of all. So when you're happy it's in the right place, take your Dremel, and we're just going to cut a groove all the way along the fracture in order to make a V groove for us to get the welding rod in. Okay, and then when you cut your groove in, cut the groove about halfway into the material. Clean it up, clean the dust off with the alcohol again, and then we're ready to start welding. Now with the welding, if you spend as much time as I do on the internet, you'll know about deep penetration, and this is what we're looking for here. We want the weld to go almost all the way through the material, right through to the other side. We don't want to just pile the welding rod up on the surface, that won't be strong. We're going to grind a lot off anyway at the end. So you really want to melt your way a long way into the material here, and then just feed the rod in as you start burning a hole. And then just like metal welding, when we get a bit of heat into it and get it going, we're just going to do a stitching action, so we're just going to stitch and stitch and stitch and stitch. Okay, so I'll do the first bit and then we'll cut and come back later. Get a nice weld pool going, nice pool of molten plastic in the middle there, and just stitch the two sides of the parent material together and feed the welding rod into the valley that you're creating as you pull the two sides in. So the most important thing is that you get the weld deep into the material. You're going to need to go at least halfway through the parent material, and then we can go in from the other side. And the same for the next bit. Hopefully you can see, so there we've got a nice weld pool going, nice pool of molten plastic. I'm just going to feed the rod into the hole that we're creating. And then we're going to stitch away to the end. Okay, so that's our little piece welded in. If you see on the edge just about there, we're penetrated about halfway through the material. When we flip it over to the good side, the facing side, you see the crack's very visible, but it's beginning to look okay. The bit that's going to break your heart really now is that we're going to have to do the same on this side. We're going to have to weld the face you can see as well, and then we'll sand that back, fill it, and then paint it to hide the repair. The reason you've got to do this side as well is that, just from experience, when this flex is in use, if you don't repair this side as well, every time that flexes, that crack's going to open up and open up and open up, and eventually it'll just propagate all the way through the weld, and it'll fracture again. Another little thing, another little tip actually, if you have blind cracks like this, cracks that just end in the middle of the piece, drill a hole right through the tip line of the crack, drill all the way through with a small drill, and then fill that hole, and that will act as a stress reliever to stop that crack running in the future. So that is all the plastic welding finished, and you can plastic weld any thermoplastic. The important things to remember are just to get the right type of welding rod, the same type of plastic in the welding rod as the part you're trying to weld. Usually with a plastic part, the type of plastic is moulded into the piece on the reverse side to help you there. And also get that penetration, get the weld going all the way through the parent material. And I know some of you are also looking at this and thinking, Jesus Christ, what a mess, but don't panic too soon, Captain Mannering, because we're nowhere near finished yet. We still need to grind these welds back. We're then going to fill them, sand them, prime them and paint them. But before we do that, we've got to repair this big hole in the grab handle here. I think the only practical way of doing that is to fibreglass it. Now, while we're fibreglassing this, we're going to need to put something in there to act as a male plug, as a former that we can lay the fiberglass around and to support the fiberglass while the resin goes off. And I think the best thing I can find to do that is this, which is a piece of Climaflex copper plumbing pipe insulation. This is quite useful because it's flexible, so I can form it to the shape of the curve of the grab handle. So we've given this 5 coats of PVA and 5 coats of release wax, so hopefully that'll be enough to stop the resin sticking to it. So I'm just going to put that into there and tape it in place, and we'll see you in a second. So that is our Climaflex in there, and we're ready to start fiberglassing. Now, this isn't a video primarily about how to do fiberglassing, so we're not going to go into all the sort of technicalities of how we mix and lay up fiberglass and resin. So I'm going to run through this fairly quickly because the video is already getting quite long. But basically what we're going to do here is give this a coat of gel coat. I'm then going to put some surfacing tissue on the gel coat and apply resin to that, and that will just help to stop the strands of glass fibre showing through on the final piece. And then I'm going to give this, I think I'll give this one coat of 450 gram per square metre chopped strand mat, and that will give a total laminate thickness of about 1.5 millimetres, which should be more than strong enough to repair this piece. I'm also going to give a layer of fibreglass to these two mounting brackets here and here because they cracked in use, so they're obviously not strong enough at the moment, so we'll try and support those box sections with a layer of fibreglass as well. So that's our gel coat mixed up and we're ready to apply this. Now we're going to apply this around about 0.5 millimetre thick, so that's one thick, even brushed coat directly to the plug there. And so let's just get on with that. And you want to apply it as far as possible in nice, long, even strokes. You're not painting a house, so don't sort of go backwards and forwards. Try, you've got to get it into the corners, but try just to spread it out in nice, even strokes. And when the gel coat has gone hard to the point where it's no longer tacky, you're ready to do your fibreglassing. Now, the best advice I could give you here, if you're fibreglassing for the first time, is get everything ready before you mix your resin. So, it's a messy old job, so we're prepared for spillages. We've got all the tools out that we're going to need for the job. We have cut out and weighed all our glass fibre mat, and then and only then have we mixed the resin up. Now the resin's mixed at the ratio of 2.5 times the mass of resin to the mass of glass fibre that you've weighed out. And bearing in mind that that's all the resin we've got for the whole job, we're just going to spread a coat all over the mould. And we've roughened the surface of the plastic as well, and then given it a really good clean down with methylated spirits in order to make sure we have the very best chance of the fiberglass sticking to the plastic. Then we're going to put a surface tissue on first of all, and I hate this stuff, and then just stipple it in as best you can. Just stipple the tissue onto the Climer Flex, and then dab it on with a bit of resin, so just wet it out with the resin. And then we're going to get our mat itself, and what we're aiming to achieve with the mat is you're just looking to wet the mat out. So that means we're going to dab the resin on with a stippling action. Stipple it on, work it into the corners, and so you don't want it wringing wet, you don't want it dripping wet, it's got to be so the mat is translucent so that you can see it's got a sort of whitish colour and you can see the plastic of the trim showing through it now. Once you've done that, we then need to consolidate the laminate, so that means we're going to get this is like a roller, series of washers on a roller, and we're just going to roll all the air balls out, and the trick is to do this without, get the air balls out without picking up the fibres. Make sure we've got it pressed firmly into the corners. The difficulty I'm having here is stopping it coming away on the side I can't really get to. So. And trim the laminate with a sharp knife and or some snips while it's still green. And I'm a little bit nervous, but let's see how it looks. Let's just take the duct tape off and pull the Climbaflex out. And I've got it partly out already. It is stuck to the gel coat, there's no doubt about that, but the PVA is coming away and it's... There we go, you can see it's out.
Wow, amazing!
I think it looks shit. Hey, joking aside though, that is not bad. It's absolutely rock solid. We've managed to get it flush with what was remaining of the original material. The only thing we've got to do is just where we couldn't get under the return there, we just got a bit of filling to do in there. So a bit of P38 filler in there, sand it back, and job's a good one. So the grab rail handle's now filled and sanded, which means the next thing we've got to do is dress these welds and get them ready for painting. Now, I don't know how well you can see, but the plastic itself is textured, so rather than sand these back with a sort of like a dual action sander, a big power sander, I want to keep the areas I'm sanding as narrow as possible so that I don't take any more of this texture of the plastic off than I absolutely have to. So what I'm going to use to sand this back is a Dremel again. I've just got a sort of sandpaper attachment on the end of the Dremel there. And I'm just going to go along with the Dremel and just take all the high spots off. So the welds are nice and full, so most of the weld is proud of the surface. So we're just going to grind this back so that we're flush, and then we'll finish that off by hand. Right, so that's the worst of the high spots ground off, and now we're just going to go and finish this off by hand. So I'm going to start with 80 grit paper, and then we're going to go down to 120, and then we're going to finish this off with 240 grit paper, and then it'll be ready for painting. Normally before priming I would go down to 400 grit, but in this case I'm not going to, because we don't want to get this too smooth. The thing is that the original plastic is textured, and the thing that will give this repair away is if we have these lines of very, very smooth plastic, and you'll see those because it won't have the same texture as the plastic. So I'm going to finish this up with 240 grit, and that'll be as fine as we go before we paint it. But let's start off with the 80 to get the rest of the high spots off, and we'll work our way down. And after you've sanded back, take a long, hard look at your welds, and if there's anywhere along your line of your weld where you can see the original crack going through, go back and re-weld it and sand it down again, because if you can see the original crack showing through anywhere, it will come through the filler and it will come through the paint when you put it back on the car, so it's better to go and re-weld it now. The other thing you can see there is we've preserved as much of that original texture as possible, so we've got a fairly limited zone of damage either side of the weld itself. And all we're left with now, we've got all the high spots off, so all we're left with now is just the lows, which we're going to fill lows. Now, with the filler, some people when they're doing plastic welding use an epoxy filler, so a fairly strong filler on the basis that that's the best way of stopping the cracking again. Personally, I've not found that to be helpful. The strength has to be in the weld. If the weld isn't strong enough, it will crack again no matter what filler you use. It will come through the paint, and that'll be a shame after spending this much time on it. So the strength has to be in the weld. Your welds have to be strong enough. So really, I don't think it makes any difference what filler you use. As you can see, we've got the welds nice and full here, so we've got very little filling to do. And so I'm just going to fill these with stopper, just knifing stopper. So that is all the filling and sanding done, and we are ready to paint. But we're going to do the painting tomorrow because that has taken me literally all day and I have had enough. So all that remains is to pour myself a glass of despair, go and take a long hard look in the mirror and think, Jesus, what a waste I've made of my life. So let's paint it and get it back on the car. Now, you can buy spray-on textured finishes if you need to restore the texture to plastic parts like this, where you've damaged it, welding it and sanding it. But having looked at this, I really don't think that's necessary in this case. I think if we just spray this with regular primer and top coat, you just won't see the repairs against the original textured finish. So we're just going to go straight ahead and prime it. Now when you're painting a plastic part, the hardest part is getting the paint to stick to the plastic. So you can either spray an adhesion promoter and then spray regular primer, but it's actually easier just to buy plastic primer which contains the adhesion promoter in it. It's also, for a piece this size, it's not really worth getting the spray gun out and particularly having the faff of cleaning it. So I'm just going to spray this with spray cans. Let's get on with it. This primer first is all shaken and ready to go. So that's the primer and the guide coat sprayed, and we had to go back and put a bit more stopper and some pinholes in the welds, and a bit of high build primer as well helped to sort of get that texture back on the smooth parts. But then we've sprayed the guide coat in black and this is looking pretty well actually, so just the top coat to go on and the job's finished. Well YouTube, apart from the colour which is still too pale and is too glossy and it's going to have to be done again, this is looking pretty good. I mean, if you look at where our little repair area there, you can just about see this difference in texture we were talking about, but other than that this is pretty much spot on. The grab rail is fixed, it's really strong, and I am pretty happy with that. So all we're going to do is do what we should have done in the first place and get some paint mixed up to match and respray it, and then we'll sit back and admire it. What do you think of that, Kate?
I never thought you'd fix that. That looks amazing.
Look at this! How good is this?
So, why is the molten plastic all over the dining table?